Well, this morning we're going to launch a new series, and that series will continue through next Easter Sunday morning. And I've been waiting and excited to preach this series to you. It was probably a few months ago that I was at home, and I got to preface by saying that because I was on the treadmill. And last night, I didn't say that I was at home on the treadmill, and I shared this story. And so Cindy, this morning before church, said, "Were you in the gym when you did that?" Because I shared with them that I was listening to the song that we just sang just a few songs ago, where it talks about our sin was strong, but Jesus, you're stronger. And how much greater God is than all the, and I was singing that at the top of my lungs while I was on the treadmill, and all of a sudden I felt like this is a series that needs to be preached. Now, last night I said that, but I didn't say I was at home on the treadmill, and so Cindy, I think, was probably just wondering, what does he do? What gym is he at? Because that would not be good. And if you've ever heard me sing, it would especially not be good. They probably would have revoked my gym membership had that been the case. So it was at home, and I just have been consumed with this thought process that we need to be reminded again as believers that the God that we serve is greater than anything that could ever come against us. So I want us to look at our key verse that we'll be looking at for the next few weeks. 1 John chapter 4, starting with verse 3, it says this: "But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world." Now here's the key verse: "You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world." Let's pray. God, in the next few moments, I pray that you will remind us again of how great you are. Lord, I know that there are those who sit in this room today, Father God, maybe they sit here and they feel defeated, they feel overwhelmed, they feel as though there is no hope. But God, I pray that these moments right now, that God, you will show yourself to them, and that God, they will leave out of this place understanding that greater is he that's in us than he that is in this world. And we give you all the praise for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as we walk through this series, I really just want to remind you and to remind myself that we are children of the Most High God, and that he is greater than anything that we could ever come against. As we prepared to go on our vacation that we were on for a couple weeks there, we met my family. It was my parents and my sister and my kids and my wife and I, and we met at the airport to get on the plane. And if you haven't traveled in recent times, maybe you're not aware of this, but now they charge you for every suitcase. It doesn't matter. You don't get one free like it used to be. Now it's every suitcase costs you $25, right? And so my dad is a frequent flyer. He flies all the time for Delta. So he's got what we would call clout with them, right? And so I don't know, he's platinum, he's diamond, whatever he is, he's got the card, and he's got the little tag. They put a tag on his luggage that says priority. Okay, I don't know what they're doing with the other bags, but that one gets priority. So don't kick it, I guess. I don't know what that means. But so he says to me, he says, hey, meet me at the airport. I can check in 6 bags for free. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. So we had there were 7 of us going on the trip, and there were 7 bags. Well, my wife has a American Express Delta card, and so she also can get a free bag with that card. So my dad says something to us. He says, hey, let's all go into the priority line here at the Delta counter. How many of you seen the priority line? Everybody get mad when you see the priority line? Man, those guys are jerks. Yeah, well, my dad's one of those. But yeah, he just pulls out his little platinum card, and my dad's not a jerk. I'm just love you, big guy. So he says, will you just come and get in line with me? And my wife thought, well, I've got a card, so I'll just go and I'll do my own little check-in at the kiosk here. And so she goes over and she checks in, and lo and behold, it still charged her the $25. And so she came over and she said, I don't know what happened, but I checked in using my card and it still charged me the $25. And I said, you know, you're not going to hear the end of this now, because my dad said come with him, and you went on your own, and he could have probably got you the bag for free, and now you're not going to hear the end of it, right? Why? Is it because of Jason Ton that the bag was free? No. Delta could care less about this guy. I fly maybe once a year, and so they, if I went up to the counter and said, hey, I'd like my bag to be priority, they'd say, the priority for you is it makes it on the plane. That's about all we're going to guarantee for you. We may strap it on the outside. We're not sure, but hopefully you'll get it when you get there. But because my dad has some clout and has some respect, I mean, he's flying to Africa again in a couple weeks. He flies all the time. Because of that, when I go and I stand with him, his clout rubs off onto me, right? And I get the benefits of him. And the same is true as we look at God. We can go and we can try and fight through things on our own and try and be in charge. But when we do that, we'll end up at a kiosk getting charged $25. Love you, honey. I'm just winning with everybody today. Family lunch is going to be lonely for me today. But today I want us to look at a topic that I think is probably one of the biggest topics that as believers that we may be faced with, and that is the topic of insecurity. And so I've titled my message today, the subtitle, other than greater than, is I am is greater than insecurity, and you'll understand that in just a little bit. And I got to be honest with you that part of this message today, I was about a month and a half ago, I knew this was a topic that we needed to cover here, and I was listening to another preacher preach a message, and a lot of what he was saying had so much to do with this, and I was like, man, so I started kind of jotting down notes, as I do, because I think it's important for me as your pastor to not just hear my own stuff, but to hear from some of the stuff that other people are preaching. I began to write down some notes, and I went back and I looked at those, and I thought, man, a lot of this stuff is perfect for what we're going to talk about today. And so, I know that there are pastors out there who won't admit to doing that, but I will admit to it because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. In fact, I had a pastor from Wisconsin contact me just a few weeks ago, and again this last week, who said, hey, Jason, I heard about street teams, and I would like to steal that idea from you. And I laughed because I thought, it's not mine. It doesn't belong to me, right? When we're doing ministry, if we're doing something that you can do and you can reach people for the kingdom, then use it, please, by all means. And so that's exciting to me. I got the street teams guys are having a conversation with him right now to try and help them as they're going to launch street teams in Wisconsin. And so we're believing that this is going to be something that will catch on all over the country, not because we want our name to be in it, but because we believe that God uses our opportunities to go and to reach into our community as a way to show his love to other people. Well, as I'm looking at insecurity, one of the things that I think that many of us probably, if we were honest with ourselves this morning, we would say, maybe there's an area of your life where you'd say, I'm just not good enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not, whatever it is, whatever your blank is, you have one probably today. You probably have, as you look at that sentence, there's probably maybe a couple of things that you would put into that sentence, and it's the way you feel. And day to day that can even change, because you could wake up tomorrow and there could be something new that you would put into that blank, and it consumes you and it stops you from being who God is calling you to be. So as we look at this, I want us to look at a story of somebody that we're probably all familiar with, but he had his own blanks. And before he could deliver others, he needed to be delivered from those blanks. So let's look at Exodus chapter 3. It says this: Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within the bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God, your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of the land into a good spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the crying of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And look at Moses' response. He says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, I think we can all relate to how Moses feels in this story. Here's Moses, he's out, he's tending the flock, and he's just going about his day-to-day activity, and all of a sudden he sees this sight, he sees a burning bush, and he approaches the burning bush. God speaks to him and says, take off your shoes, it's holy ground, and then he says, listen, I'm going to send you back to Egypt, and you are going to set my people free. Now, that is a big responsibility. That is a huge task. Moses did not wake up that morning going, I wonder what huge task I'm going to take on. His thought process was, hey, I'm going to go do what I do every day, and that is I'm going to take the flock out. I'm going to make sure they eat. I'm going to make sure I don't lose any of them, and I'm going to come home, and then I'm going to rest, and I'm going to hang out with my family. That was his day. And all of a sudden, his day gets thrown into this whole other realm when God says, listen, I'm going to send you. You're going to do one of the most amazing tasks I've ever asked anybody to do. And Moses' response is, who am I? The enemy will often use your history to trigger your insecurity. So I want us to look at the two voices that are speaking to Moses. God's voice, and God is saying, I am concerned about my people. I am choosing you, and I am sending you. And Moses basically responds with, I am not able to do this. I'm messed up. I'm incapable. I'm inadequate. I'm unworthy. You see, Moses had messed up, and I'm not going to go too deep into the story, but if you're at all familiar with the story of Moses, there's a couple of stories that we probably, even if you grew up just going to Sunday school on occasion, you probably heard, and one of which is when Moses was a baby and he was put in the basket and floated down the river, and the Pharaoh's family finds him and they rescue him and they basically raise him as part of their own family. And Moses gets older and he realizes, hey, I'm not Egyptian, I'm actually a Hebrew, and the Hebrews are being treated horribly here. And so now he's conflicted because he's not sure what to do. And he finds himself out one day and he sees an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew. And all of a sudden he gets really angry at what he sees. And so he looks around and nobody seems to be looking. So he begins to beat the Egyptian and he beats him to death. So he hides the body and he thinks, well, it's going to be okay. And a few days later, he comes across a couple of Hebrews who are fighting. And he says, why are you fighting with each other? You should knock it off. And one of the Hebrews says, hey, you know what? What are you going to do? You're going to kill me too like you did the Egyptian? And all of a sudden, Moses finds himself understanding that he doesn't know where he belongs anymore. Because he found himself feeling like he was an Egyptian, and then he began to feel like a Hebrew, but they weren't accepting him. So what does he do? He flees and he goes to the wilderness. And I say that to you this morning because some of you sit in this room this morning and maybe you find yourself in the wilderness today. Maybe you don't know where you belong. Maybe you've come to River of Life and you've accepted Christ, and so you know, hey, I'm not supposed to be part of this world anymore. But then you hear me talk about my church family and you go, but I don't really necessarily feel like I'm part of the family, so I don't know where I am today. So you find yourself out in the wilderness somewhere and you're just biding your time trying to figure out what is next for me. But can I tell you, Moses did that, and guess what? God knew exactly where he was, and he showed up and he spoke to him and he told him, I have a plan for your life. You need to quit sitting out here in the wilderness and you need to go and do what I'm calling you to do. Moses had messed up and his past was defining him. It was stopping him. As soon as God starts telling him what he wants to do through him, the enemy started to remind him of his past. I have a few quotes that if you're following along on the interactive, you can You can see them on there, but I use these quotes often because I think they're important. One is, God never consults your past to create your future. And I think a lot of times that we sit in a room like this, and maybe you feel even in your heart, you feel like God is calling you to do something, and yet you hold back because you go, if people knew what I was a part of, if people knew who I was, if people knew what I had done, then they would never ask me to be a part of that ministry. They would never ask me to be a part of that or to do that. But can I tell you that God never looks at your past to determine your future, because he's already set you free from your past. The other one is, never let the wounded places of your past govern your ability to lead. Fight those insecurities with all that you've got. But God, I am sure you are able to deliver these people, but who am I? Moses is saying, I'm so screwed up, and you start telling yourself that you are unable. It may be a big mess like Moses's, or it may be a small things that you do every day. Maybe your thought life is jacked up, or your internet history is embarrassing. Whatever it is, the enemy will use that thing to stop you from doing what God's calling is on your life. How can God know me so well and still love me that much? Maybe your statement that you would say to yourself is that you are never enough. Just never enough. So Moses begins, if we continue this story, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if we were to continue this story, you'd see that Moses begins to ask God, well, God, how will they know that you sent me? And so God answers that question as well. And he says, listen, I'm going to show myself. He goes, here, let me show you a couple things. Drop your staff on the ground. And so Moses drops his staff, and it turns into a snake. And then he picks it back up, and it turns back into a staff. A bunch of little things like that. So he's like, okay, I answered that. So you can go, right? But Moses isn't satisfied with that, and Moses still continues to argue with God, and basically says, listen, I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm not somebody who can speak publicly. And, you know, if you send me to Egypt, I'm going to be in the Pharaoh's courts, and I'm going to be in front of all these people. And what if I don't know how to speak right? What if I don't do it right, right? And so he's arguing with God. Verse 12. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Now look at this. Moses has all kinds of questions about how, and God's already talking about when, right? His questions are, how will this happen? And God's like, don't worry about the how. I'm talking about it's going to happen. I'm already past you getting them out of Egypt. I'm not going to give you all the details as to how that's going to happen. I'm just telling you that you can focus on how, but I got the how. So when it happens, you're going to be here and you're going to be worshiping on this mountain. God says, I made you the way that you are. See, when Moses begins to question his abilities, God said, listen, I've been the one to make you. You know, when you doubt the product, you insult the manufacturer. When you doubt the product, you are insulting the manufacturer. So when you sit back and you go, I just don't have it in me. You know, I know they would like me to come and help with the Easter egg hunt, but I'm an introvert, and I just don't think that's in me to do it, and I just don't think God made me that. Can I tell you, you're insulting the manufacturer when you say you can't do something if God's calling you to do it. If God left it out of you, it's not needed to accomplish your destiny. You know, it was interesting as I was looking through this, I was caught off guard by something that I had read, and that was, insecurity isn't humility. It's ultimately an insult to God. You see, I think a lot of times when we hear somebody that's insecure, we go, man, they are so humble. Aren't they humble? I mean, they won't step out and do anything. They're just so humble. No. Humility is good, and we're called to be humble, but when we're doing it out of thinking we can't do it, then we're insulting God if God is calling you to do that thing. And we begin to question God's ability. Sometimes insecurity comes when we judge ourselves based on someone else's calling. Hear that for a second. Sometimes insecurity comes because we're judging ourselves based on what somebody else is called to do. So you see Derek come up here and lead in prayer, and you go, oh man, I could never get up and just talk like that without having a bunch of notes and without fumbling through it. Well, maybe you're not called to get up here and talk. That's okay. Not everybody has the same calling. But if you feel God is calling you to be a preacher someday and you go, I just don't know that I could ever do it, then you need to quit doubting the manufacturer, because if he's calling you, then he's got it in you to do it, but you just got to start stepping out and walking in faith. It took a lot of faith for Dan to get up here and preach a couple weeks ago. It was not something he was super excited to go do. But aren't you glad that he stepped out and said, listen, I feel like God called me to do it, so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to just trust that God is going to be with me while I do it. I think if I can be transparent for a moment, for me, one of the things that I struggle with, I'll be honest, is oftentimes I compare my calling to someone else's calling. So as a church planter, I'll see other churches in town, whether they're older or around the same age as us or whatever, and I'll compare. I'll go, oh man, they're really just, all of a sudden they're exploding and they're growing, and what's going on there? And I'll begin to doubt myself. But how many know the calling that God placed on my life and on this church was to reach this community and to show love and to take care of those in East Missoula that God puts in our path, and that's our calling. So if I just sit and compare myself to somebody else in Missoula or in some other city, then that's not my calling. All I can compare myself is to the calling that God's laid on our heart, and if we're doing the best that we can to do that, then we're right where God wants us to be. The comparison thing is a trap. In fact, I heard, and I know Derek made a few comments about me putting stuff on Facebook on my vacation, but it was interesting because I heard just not too long ago that this generation, there's a lot more depression in this generation, and I think a lot of it's due to social media because people are constantly putting out all the good stuff that's going on in their life. So if you're sitting in your cubicle at work this last week, you don't even have a window to look out, and you know it's probably snowing outside, and then you get on Facebook and you see me posting palm trees, then that maybe causes some depression in your life. We saw somebody wearing a shirt while we were in Florida that said, my wish for you is that your life will be half as good as you make it out to be on Facebook, right? Because it's true. Most people when you're on social media, you're making sure everybody sees all the good stuff that's going on. And we are a people who like to compare. We compare ourselves. Well, they get to go on vacation. They get to do this, and they get to do that. And you see they got a new car, and you see they're moving into a new house, and I don't get that stuff. How come I don't get that? And we compare, instead of just saying, God, what do you have for me? Who is it that you want me to be? What is it you want me to do? And if we would compare to that, we would win. As I was looking at this story again, I noticed that Moses never doubted God throughout this story. I think we often think that when we hear of somebody that isn't doing what God's calling them to do, it's because they lack faith in God. But I think more often than not, it's lacking faith in ourselves, in our own ability to do things. It's not that I don't think it's not God that I don't think you can do it. It's just I don't think I can do it. It's not you, God, it's me, right? It's not you, it's me. I think you have the ability, but I don't know that I have the ability to do it. But if God's calling you to do it, he knows you better than you know yourself. So how do we deal with our insecurity? Well, I want to back up in this story just a little bit. In Exodus chapter 3, starting with verse 13, Moses again is trying to get out of this, and this is where we find ourselves in the story. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God, again, now he's speaking through the burning bush. God says this. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. So Moses says, listen, if you send me and I go and I talk to the Israelites, what's your name? How are they going to know? Who are you? And God answers with this kind of a weird, I am, he says. I am that I am. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know that that would be enough of an answer for me. Like, okay, really, God, no, seriously, who are you? And he says, no, I am. Now, I want us to look at that because that has such an amazing implication, and I've heard it my whole life, but I've never looked at it the way that I'm going to explain this to you today. First of all, the I am is present tense, right? Because he also says, I'm the God of your forefathers. So he wants them to know, listen, it's the same God that's done all these other things that you've heard about, but I am. Why? I'm present. I'm here. I'm able. I can do, and I will. That's the God that you serve. Because a lot of times I think as believers, we read the Bible story, oh yeah, that's cool. God was. God is. God always will be, right? So that's obviously important. But I want you to hear it again because as we look at this story, the devil starts telling you that you're not enough. And God says, I am. You see, when you look at that sentence that I put up on the screen before, and you say, I'm not strong enough, God says, I am. When you say, I'm not good enough, God says, I am. I'm not faithful enough, well, I am. You see, he is, I am. And it doesn't matter what you can and can't do because he can do all things. He fills in your blank, and he is able. Now, as I was looking at this, the thing that I had never looked at before, and I want you to get this with me, because as we look at this story of Moses, we know that he eventually says yes. He eventually goes and he does, and he goes through a huge amount of turmoil to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, and we can follow that story. But now we find ourselves many chapters down in this story. And all of a sudden in this story, we see that God goes to a mountain and he has some communication with God, and he gets the 10 commandments, and he comes down and he presents them to his people. Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 says this, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. You go, Jason, what does that have to do with anything? Because I was raised in the church, and so I was raised, you don't say God, you don't say Jesus Christ in a way that is not honoring to him. So you don't hit yourself with a hammer on accident and then use one of those as an expletive because it's not honoring to God. And that's true. We shouldn't do that. But I want us to look at this story for a moment because just a few chapters earlier, God says, my name is I am, and it will be from generation to generation. That is my name from now on. And now they get this commandment that comes down the mountain, and the mountain says, don't take my name in vain. What's his name? Are we awake this morning? I've been saying it over and over again. What's his name? I am. So when you say, I am a loser, you're taking God's name in vain. I am unworthy. I am unable. I am not good enough. You see, when you accept Christ, you take his name. When you say, I am a believer in Jesus Christ, all of a sudden, you take his name. I got back from my trip, and Shannon and I were driving down the road, and we saw a big city bus drive by, and on the back of it, my wife is a realtor in town, it said, Tawn Clutty, which is her business partner. Big, bold. She took my name. Good and bad. She took my name. Right? Her maiden name's Kelly, but there was nothing that said Kelly on that bus. It said Tawn, right? Because when we got married, we became one, and she took my name. When you accepted Christ, you took his name. And so when you say, I am unable, you are saying he is unable. When you're saying, I am not good enough, then you're saying he's not good enough. And you need to understand, if you've got some insecurity in your life, today is the day where you need to understand whose name you took. Because he is always able. He is always good enough. He is always forgiving enough. He is always enough. But God, I am so lacking. God says, I am sufficient. But God, I am so doubtful. And God says, I am so faithful. You see, in him, I am. In him, no matter what comes my way, in him, I am. I am able. If God is calling you and tugging at your heart to do something, and you feel like, I just can't do it, then you need to understand, you maybe can't, but he can. I was thinking about this not too long ago, that I youth pastored for 11 to 12 years, and I would always have people come up to me and say, hey, when are you going to be a real pastor? That was my favorite. I loved that. And I'd say, well, I am a real pastor. And they'd say, no, well, you know what I mean. When are you going to pastor your own church? And my response to that always was never. I had no interest in it, had no desire to do it, didn't think that was something. I just thought, man, I'll youth pastor until I'm old enough that the kids laugh me out of there, and then I'll go and do something else. And looking back on that, I always thought that was just the way I was wired, but I realize now it was this insecurity that I had. See, I didn't think that I could ever pastor a church. I didn't think I had it in me to be a leader. I didn't think I had it in me to do this week in and week out. And it wasn't until I began to trust and say, God, I feel like you're tugging at my heart. I feel like you're telling me to plant a church in East Missoula, but I don't know that I got it in me to do that. I don't know that I can, but aren't you glad that it wasn't dependent on me, because I know I am. And that's just it. The devil will tell you all the time, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough. Or do you think you are? Do you think you're good enough? Do you think you're smart enough? Maybe he'll even do it that way, where he asks you the question, you think you're good enough? Your answer to that now needs to be, I don't think I am. I know I am. You see, it takes the pressure off of you. If you can say, listen, I don't think that I'm good enough, but I know he is. I don't think I am. I know I am. Because greater is he that's in me than he that's in this world. And he can do all things. Right? We need to start walking in a positive mindset. It's easy to sit back and focus on negative things, isn't it? It's easy to think about all the things you wish were different in your life. It's easy to sit back and wish for more. But what if instead of that, we began to just focus on the things that God is already doing in our lives? You know, you're free today because he set you free. You're capable today because he's in you and he can do all things. You're forgiven. What a great week for us to be reminded of that. Because not one of us sits in this room deserving that forgiveness, but it's given to us. You're enough. You're enough. The God of the universe made you. He designed you just the way that you are. And so when you say, well, I wish I had more of this, or I wish I could do this better, no, you are enough. He created you. Now it's time for you to start using what he created to glorify him. If I can have everybody in the room, as we close this time together, would you just do me a favor and close your eyes?
Well, we just wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us for today's message at River of Life. And before we close, we always want to provide an opportunity that if the message resonated with you, just given the opportunity to make that initial decision to begin following Jesus. And one of my favorite verses is probably one of the more popular verses, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. God loves us so much that he made it extremely simple, that all we have to do is believe in him and the sacrifice that his Son made for us. And that begins us on our relationship with God. And, you know, the way that we can always enhance that relationship and go deeper is by spending time in His Word and by spending time in prayer with Him or spending time in worship and just continually building that relationship. But as a church family, we would love to stay connected with you and find out any way that we can help you, pray with you, anything like that that's going on. If you just click the link that's right below, shoot us an email, let us know what's going on with you, and we would love to stay connected with you. But once again, thank you so much for joining us here at River of Life for this gathering.